120,000 Canadians left the country in the last 12 months. Not temporary residents, not international students on expiring visas. Canadian citizens and permanent residents packing up and going somewhere else. And according to StatsCan, that number is the highest it's been in the 74 years of tracking that data. Let that land for a second. 74 years. That covers every recession, every housing crash, every political crisis that Canada's been to in recent memory. And right now, more Canadians are choosing to leave than at any point during any of that. I want to talk about what's actually driving this, what kind of people are leaving, and what it means if you're someone who's still here and still trying to figure out where you want to be in this country. This topic gets a lot of surface level takes. People hear Canadians are leaving and immediately jump to taxes and Trudeau or Carney and Trump and the cost of living. And some of those things are definitely a part of it, don't get me wrong. But the full picture is more complicated and honestly more concerning than any one of those single talking points. The data I'm referencing comes directly from Statistics Canada Q1 2026, and the headline number is 30,092 emigrants, that's people leaving, in that one quarter alone. That's up for the fifth straight quarter in a row, and that's not a blip. That's a sustained trend that has been building for the last 3 years. I want to separate a couple things here from getting mixed up because you're going to hear people talk about population dropping in Canada and assume it's all temporary residents leaving or international students finishing their programs and that kind of thing. That's a separate issue completely. The 120,000 number that I'm talking about is citizens and permanent residents only, people who had every reason to stay and chose not to. So who is actually leaving? Well, that's the part that doesn't get really talked about enough. The people leaving Canada aren't the ones who just arrived and didn't settle in. They're not facing culture shock or foreign credential issues. They're Canadians. People who grew up here, built careers here, and they're now looking at what other countries are offering and deciding if somewhere else makes sense for them. And here's what makes it worse. The countries they're moving to are not randomly accepting anyone who applies. Most countries that attract skilled immigrants specifically want people who are young, educated, and bringing in-demand skills. And that's exactly the demographic who's walking out the door. Canada has already seen this in the startup and tech world for years. If you want to build a serious company and actually get the funding to do it, you probably have to leave. The conditions here haven't made it easy, and that conversation has now spread well beyond tech. You've got professionals in healthcare, finance, trades, engineering, people at their stage of the career where they have options, and the options outside of Canada are now looking more attractive than they did 5 years ago. But why is this happening now? Well, cost of living is an obvious one, and I'm not going to pretend that it isn't. Housing is a big fear for a lot of people as well. If you're a skilled professional in your 30s and you've been watching home prices in any major Canadian city over the last decade, the math isn't great. You earn a good income, you do everything right, and home ownership can still feel like the finish line that keeps getting pushed back. That's not a Toronto or a Hamilton even specific problem. That's a Canada-wide issue that's built up over 20 years of policy decisions that have prioritized real estate as an investment vehicle over housing as a place to live. But it's not just housing. The broader value proposition of staying in Canada has shifted for a lot of people. High income taxes relative to what they'd pay in certain US states, healthcare that sounds great on paper, but sometimes in practice means waiting to see a specialist, and a sense that the system that is supposed to be working for people is more and more strained and feeling more permanent rather than temporary. Other countries have gotten better at marketing themselves to this kind of person. The US, of course, has always been an obvious destination, and it still is for a lot of Canadians, but Portugal, Spain, the UAE, Mexico, these places have actively been recruiting skilled workers and retirees with programs designed to make the transition easy for them. And when the pull factors from outside get stronger, at the same time the push factors inside get worse, you get what we're seeing right now. And what it is that policymakers are getting wrong, and StatsCan publishes this data, the government sees it, and the response so far has been essentially, we'll replace them with immigration. The logic being that if we lose 120,000 people, we'll just bring in more. Human capital is interchangeable. You can fill the gap. The problem with that is it ignores what you're actually losing versus what you're getting. The people leaving aren't entry-level workers who can be directly swapped out. They're mid-career senior professionals who have spent years building expertise, networks, and institutional knowledge inside the Canadian system and industries, and that doesn't transfer overnight. It also assumes the incoming talent won't notice the same problems that pushed people out in the first place. If the conditions that made life in Canada less attractive haven't changed, you're going to have the same conversation from the new people in the next 5-10 years, just with a different group asking why they should stay. The other side of this equation, though, is that there's less people coming in. And people aren't necessarily putting those two things together, especially when it comes to housing. At the same time Canadians are leaving at a record pace, Canada has dramatically cut how many people are also coming in. The government slashed new temporary resident targets by 43% in a single year. We went from 673,000 new temporary arrivals in 2025 down to 385,000 in 2026. It's almost 300,000 fewer people coming in this year than last. International students alone have been cut in half approximately. And on the permanent resident side, the peak was 500,000 a year. That number is now down to 380,000 and falling to 365,000 by 2027. So from peak to where we're headed, that's about 135,000 fewer permanent residents per year that Canada was taking in at its highest point. Now, to be clear, the government isn't cutting permanent immigration dramatically. That side is relatively stable, and that gets mixed up a lot, I think. The 43% cut is almost entirely on the temporary resident side, students, temp workers, and that people who fall into that category. But here's why it matters for housing specifically. For years, rapid population growth through immigration was cited as one of the main drivers of housing demand in Canada. More people arriving means more people needing a place to live. That pressure pushed prices up. It pushed rents up. It made supply feel constantly inadequate. And now you have the opposite pressure building. More people leaving than any point in 74 years, fewer people arriving than we've seen in many years. Those two things together are a meaningful shift in demand. And in a housing market that's already been cooling, that's a real factor. Now, that doesn't mean that housing prices are about to collapse. There are other forces at play: supply constraints, interest rates, local market condition, and also the continued demand by Canadians who want to own a home. But the population story that was used to justify sky-high prices for years is changing fast. So if you're watching this at a point where you're questioning where you want to be in Canada, or even whether Canada is where you want to be, I put together a free neighborhood guide for Hamilton that walks you through the different areas in a way that actually gives you useful information. Real breakdowns on different neighborhoods if you are considering the hammer. But what does this mean if you're staying? Because I've laid out a lot of reasons why people are leaving, and it would be easy to watch this and think you should be figuring out your exit plan too. But I think the framing is worth questioning. Leaving Canada sounds like a solution. And for some people in specific situations, it might be. But for most people watching this, it's a lot more complicated than social media posts about moving to Portugal look. I've had friends do the same, and remember, everywhere you go, there you are. The countries people are rushing to have their own problems. The US right now is politically volatile in a way that affects daily life. Portugal and Spain have their own housing crisis, driven in part by the influx of foreigners driving up prices for locals. Sounds familiar? The UAE gives you low taxes, but very little in the way of long-term security of rights. Mexico is beautiful, but the infrastructure and healthcare situation outside of a few core cities is not comparable to what you have in Canada. So yeah, we have real problems here, but it's also one of the safest countries on earth. The healthcare system, for all its strain, is still there when you need it. My family's gone through it recently, and we've actually been very impressed with how it's worked for us. The education system is still strong. The social fabric, compared to a lot of places, still holds tight. And depending on where you are in Canada, the quality of life is genuinely hard to beat. And here's the thing about Hamilton specifically. A lot of what makes people want to leave Canada comes from the experience of living in Toronto or Vancouver, the congestion, the cost, the sense that you're working constantly just to maintain a baseline. That experience is real, I get it, but it's not the Canadian experience everywhere. Hamilton is 45 minutes from Toronto, and the difference in how life feels here is significant. You can buy a detached home in Stoney Creek or Binbrook or East Hamilton for prices that you would get just a parking spot for in Toronto. You've got the escarpment, the waterfront, real neighborhoods where people know each other, James Street North, Ottawa Street, all of these things that you wouldn't expect for a city its size. and the food scene is legitimately good. And right now, with the market the way it is, buyers have leverage here that they haven't had in years. Inventory is up, competition is down, so if you've been waiting to get into the market, the conditions right now are better than they have been in a long time. The grass isn't always greener. Sometimes it's just a different set of problems with better weather. If Canada is home and you're trying to figure out where to plant yourself, the answer might not be leaving the country. It might just be getting out of the city, having a change of scenery.